Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of The Plain Truth, and this week we're going to be talking about turbulence. Joining me as always is the legend that is Captain Al. Hi Captain Al.
A very good evening, Matt.
And how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And your good self?
Oh, living the dream as always. There we are. That's the mandatory pleasantries out of the way. Joining us, actually, we have another special guest joining us today, which I'm very excited to say. A gentleman who has the pleasure / misfortune of working for a company called WeatherQuest that's based here in Norwich. It gives me my great pleasure to welcome Dan Holley. Hi, Dan.
Yeah, hi there, Matt. They're a great company to work for. Oh, trust me on that one.
Absolutely. Well, with Jim Bacon as the previous CEO, who could possibly say otherwise? Absolutely. Now, Dan, I've troubled your rare opportunity of an evening off to talk about the word turbulence. Now, turbulence is something that we come across quite regularly when it comes to flying, and really, I have literally no idea what turbulence is. So I wondered if perhaps you could fill me in.
Yeah, sure. So turbulence is primarily driven by what we call wind shear. And that's basically where the winds are changing speed or direction, either in the horizontal or the vertical. So, the atmosphere is very chaotic. It is a fluid. It's constantly changing. And there will be boundaries where you've got these sharp gradients in temperature, for example, but also these sharp gradients in sort of wind speed or direction. So if you're crossing one of these boundaries, you're going to experience a lot of twisting and turning motions and eddies and that sort of thing. And that will ultimately induce turbulence as well. And there are many different ways that you can get turbulence. Obviously, the one that probably comes to mind first off is near thunderstorms, because there's a lot of motion going on within a thunderstorm and that affects the air around it. But other places where you can get turbulence are near hills as well. So if the air is flowing over a hill on the leeward side, you'll get a lot of turbulence developing as well with standing waves. So if an airport is near a mountain range, for example, such as Denver in Colorado, then that could have an impact on aircraft trying to land or take off there, depending on the wind direction, of course, relative to the high ground that's nearby. But another place that you can get turbulence is on the edge of jet streams as well, because there's a sharp gradient of wind speed within the jet stream and outside of it. And that sharp gradient can also induce a lot of spin and a lot of turbulence and eddies and that sort of thing there as well.
So thanks, Dan. That's really good. The interesting point for me, obviously, is so you're saying there's obviously quite a lot of movement in the air, essentially, which is what's generating that bump, if you like, that we're feeling. Now, Al, obviously that has a major impact on how you're planning your routes, presumably, as well, because we've all seen horror stories and photographs of people being thrown around in the air, inside the aircraft, as a result of this. So, what steps do you try and do? What data do you have access to, if you like, to change your plan, for example, to try and avoid these? And what impact does the turbulence have on the aircraft when you're flying?
Okay, well, we're lucky in Europe that we have access to some pretty good weather prediction computer systems. But I think Dan will probably admit that it's not an exact science, the forecasting of turbulence. And where you're using basically a paper chart with some symbols drawn on it with your route superimposed, you've got to really think in 3 dimensions, because the difference of a couple of 100 feet can be the difference between a really smooth ride and really quite a rough ride. And, maybe just a few 100 meters left or right of that can have the same effect. So typically, when Dan was talking about jet streams, and I know a lot of people kind of struggle visualizing these things, because like a lot of things, if you can't see it, it's difficult to believe that it's there. It's a bit like electricity. Some people still think it's weird magic. But what I say to my clients, what I say to my clients when we're discussing turbulence with regards to fear of flying is, try to imagine a river or a stream. And there are parts of that river or stream that are quite sort of turbulent with white water. And there are other periods where it's very, very calm. And if you think about the river or the stream as its whole journey, well, that's very similar to an airline flight. So we have planning charts, we have significant weather charts that reasonably accurately predict where there is going to be cumulonimbus clouds, they're thunderstorm clouds in simple terms, and where we have jet streams. And there can be many jet streams just in Europe. And whilst they're predominantly from the west traveling east, they do change direction from time to time, and all of a sudden they'll take a sudden dive to the south. So you're not just necessarily, if you're flying west to east, you're not just sat in one or parallel in one, you're crossing them as well. So we do try to plan our route to avoid the worst of the forecast turbulence. The difficulty that myself face, and probably the meteorologists face, is it is just a forecast. And there are many occasions where we get turbulence that was just not forecast at all, or equally where really bad turbulence is forecast and there isn't any. So it can be a bit frustrating. And unfortunately, we don't really have any substantial equipment on board the aircraft that can forecast clear air turbulence. We can quite clearly see build-ups, so where there's cloud, because our weather radar can reflect off moisture, but what it can't do is it can't reflect off clear air. So yeah, it's a challenge, and I genuinely believe that in maybe the next 10 or 15 years, the technology for being able to accurately predict turbulence will get a lot better. What do you think, Dan? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. And in some ironic way, I think aviation is going to play a key role in that as well, because we rely very heavily on the measurements that get taken on board of planes that then get fed into the computer models that drive the forecast at the end of the day. So, the more we can get measurements from high up in the atmosphere, the better understanding we'll have of these jet streams, and hopefully the better we can then predict them further down the line. But like you say, the jet stream, I think a lot of people think of it as like a straight line across the Atlantic, for example, from Canada to the UK. But actually, it can wave about quite a bit. You get lots of ridges and troughs in it. And that makes it very complicated to pick out parts of the jet stream that are more likely to produce the areas of quite bad turbulence in places. And as a result, the winds are not necessarily going from west to east. They can go back on themselves sometimes as well. So it's incredibly complex, the upper atmosphere, and it changes all the time. So, you take off from Heathrow, but it's always evolving on that journey as well. It doesn't stay in a fixed position even while you're flying across the Atlantic. It does change over time.
Absolutely. One of the things that I sometimes talk to people about, and they think that I'm barking mad.
No, surely not, Captain Al.
we obviously use very, very powerful computers. All of the Met offices around the world are, all using these supercomputers. But of course, these supercomputers need data to work with. And people think I'm barking mad when I talk about weather reporting buoys out in the Atlantic that are taking the sea level pressure, the height of the waves, the temperature, the dew point, and that sort of thing. And these are all fed into the computer. And something that Dan alluded to there is the fact that, it's hand in glove meteorology and aviation, because when we fly across the Atlantic, for example, the aircraft either manually or automatically are sending weather data back that is fed into these computers. And admittedly, probably 10 or so years ago, when I was reasonably frequently traveling across the Atlantic, if we were flying on a non-standard route, so if, say, we were going down to Cancun in Mexico, we would be asked to send hourly Met reports. And this would just be the wind direction, velocity, and the outside air temperature, and this is fed into those supercomputers. It's not just all by magic.
Quite.
But people generally think that these weather reporting buoys out in the Atlantic were stuff of the 1940s, but they're still out there, aren't they, Dan? Tell me I'm not lunatic.
No, they're definitely still out there. In fact, last night, one of them recorded a wind gust of 112 miles an hour off the south coast of Ireland. So, they're still very much a key part of all this sort of weather data assimilation that goes into these weather models, aviation, satellite data increasingly so as well, but obviously land-based weather stations as well. But for a country like the UK, where most of our weather comes in off the Atlantic, we don't have a great way really of seeing what is going on over the Atlantic. We've got some satellite data, but having aviation and planes going across the Atlantic all day, taking these measurements is vital really to improve our forecasting of what may be coming towards Western Europe.
So absolutely, a very, very simple illustration of that. I mean, I grew up in southwest Wales, and if you want to know what the weather's going to be like in southwest Wales tomorrow, just look at the weather in Waterford in Ireland, because 3/4 of the year, what Waterford has today will be your weather tomorrow. Right. It's as simple as that.
Okay. I mean, that's an interesting look on it, I suppose. There's so I mean, we've mentioned jet streams there, obviously, and obviously turbulence is part of that, from what I understand. So, what does the turbulence actually do to the aircraft physically when you're flying it? Because I mean, we've all seen the horrific pictures, if you like, of people being thrown out of their seat because they didn't wear the seatbelt when told to, etc., etc. I mean, is there any risk to the aircraft as a result of that turbulence?
Truthfully, the aircraft are designed to withstand severe turbulence. Now, the cases where people have been injured in severe turbulence encounters, they're as a result of, you say, not wearing their seatbelt or just encountering unexpected severe turbulence. And in all those cases, the aircraft survives because it's tested to a far greater G loading than you and I can sustain and a comfort level. So one of the aspects that frequently comes up when I'm talking to people is people talk about, air bubbles and air pockets. Well, as Dan mentioned earlier, the air is a fluid. It's difficult for a lot of people to think about it, but the air is, very similar to water. So if you have turbulent water, then you get, sort of bubbles within it, but they disappear. So we can't have voids within the air. So when people talk about, suddenly, we fell thousands of feet in turbulence. Well, no, you didn't. The difficulty is, and we've talked a little bit about this on a personal level, is that when we're sat on an aeroplane, we don't have any real easy way of judging height changes, if you like. There's no datum, so we're strapped to something that's moving very quickly through the air. So even a change of 1 or 2 feet is relatively significant. So if I was to strap you to an office chair and lift you up and down 1 or 2 feet, it's quite noticeable to you.
Yes,
and that's all the aircraft. That's all the aircraft is experiencing. It's very, very unusual for us to have anything more than 20 feet of altitude change in the majority of turbulence. When we get into severe turbulence, and when I've been flying for over 25 years, 14 and odd thousand hours. I've only encountered severe turbulence twice. Both occasions were short-lived. No significant injuries, lots of spilt wine, the occasional spilt curry, that's the end result. And they were variations in altitude of about 50 or 60 feet. It's just that people's perception as a human being, we've got very good motion detectors, so we can detect if we're being moved up and down a couple of feet. And, we're not used to being moved in that sense. So we are quite sensitive to it. So the aeroplanes are absolutely fine in turbulence. There are 2 people sat at the front of the aeroplane who will want to be out of that turbulence as much as you do.
Indeed. Well, that sounds like a perfect place to bring that subject to a close. Thank you, Captain Al. Thank you, Dan Holley. If you'd like to watch more from our great series, then you can do that by pressing here. We've also created you a playlist with all the Plain Truth episodes, and you'll find that just here. Why not like and subscribe to our channel? That way you will be notified whenever we post our great content. Or if you've got a question that you'd like Captain Al to answer, then why not pop it in the comments box below, and you may well feature on an upcoming episode of The Plain Truth.